This is the one I don't even know if you'd seen this one. This actually came from the NBER, which, as you know, Grant, is the official arbiter of whether we're in recessions or expansions. And so they did a fascinating
Dave,
thing.
whether we have been in recession, don't forget.
Right. Yeah, it's always very, you're right. That's, like a year later, they finally make that call.
Right.
But what's fascinating about this, and I really hadn't thought about this, is that at least for the majority of consumers, you need to look at the impact of these much higher interest rates. I showed some of those charts. I mean, you probably know this. The average interest rate now on credit card debt is 22.75%. There's over $1 trillion of credit card debt now. Not all of that revolves. I realize that, but a big chunk of it does. So these higher interest rates are a real cost of living increase, not for the people necessarily on this webinar. For us, it might be disinflationary because we're making more income from our, say our cash equivalents. But for the typical, most of America, I think it is a legitimate way to look at the CPI. Have you seen this before?
I haven't. No, I'm just looking at it now. It's the first time I've seen it. I mean,
I think it's
I've seen
fascinating.
shadow stats, and I know that they go back to I think the late 80s, early 90s, and use that measurement, and CPI is always higher. But I haven't seen this one before.
Well, I mean, the housing is part of the adjustment, but the big delta is because of including the change in interest rates. And I think that's why people are disenchanted with the economy. You would think that there'd be a lot more optimism, but I think this explains why. It's just not very. I mean, we know that the grocery store prices have been sticky, and now when you look at, like, for people buying a new car, with it used to be almost 0% financing, and now it's more like 8-9% for a new car. And of course, you have the insurance rates, which is not included in this. But anyway, I think that it's important to realize that the CPI number that we're looking at is I know you have a lot of folks that are in your universe that have been very suspicious of the official CPI, and I think this just really drives it home pretty graphically. So probably don't need this, but I think it gets to the point that the Fed's going to have a really tough sales job to do to convince the world, the financial markets, that they really have inflation under control, but they'll do their best.
Dave, can I add a couple of things to that, Dave?
Sure,
Firstly,
sure.
about the wages. I think the wages is such an important thing for people to understand. Wages don't go down again. You don't cut people's wages when inflation subsides, and so wages are so sticky. And everyone's been talking for many years that Japan has been this leading light, and if we all look at Japan, we'll have a good handle on what's going to happen in future, both for monetary policy and deflation, and everything you want. Japan has been the vanguard of all of that. I mean, I think that's a far too simplistic a comparison, but one place that I think people aren't really paying attention are wages in Japan. And the way it works over there, they have basically an annual negotiation for wages, and the companies and the labor unions meet and they decide what the wage increases are going to be, which is a very Japanese way of doing it. Everyone gets together and we all come to a consensus. They've just concluded the latest round of wage negotiations, and Japanese workers have just been awarded the highest increase in 30 years. And that's a
I
big
actually had
one.
that chart in here. I took it out just because I
Oh,
was running out of space,
okay.
but it's a
Yeah, no,
great point.
but I think it's really important, Dave, because
It is.
this is a country that has struggled mightily, as we all know, to create any kind of inflation, and they've now got the stickiest inflation of all at a 30-year high. Um, and so I think that's really important, because what we've seen in the US are a lot of big companies, Walmart's, Amazon's, uh, giving out pretty high wage increases. And of course, the problem with that is that these companies employ a lot of people. So everybody is friends with or are neighbors with a Walmart employee or an Amazon employee. So everyone is hearing about, hey, we got decent wage. So that feeds through. And to your point, Dave, about why people are grumpy, when people are grumpy and they hear that their buddy who works for Costco just got a really decent wage hike, it foments that. And I think that's why there's so many people looking at Google searching strike. It's why we're starting to see labor agitators. We're certainly seeing them in the UK. We're starting to see some high profile trade union leaders getting the kind of exposure we last saw in the 1970s, when there were a lot of firebrand trade union leaders in the UK. And this pattern's repeating over again. So I think watching wages is an incredibly important thing to do.